Hey guys, so I'm making this video today to help people decide which Mac Mini would be the right one to choose. So I'm going to hopefully give you a better idea of which one is the right Mac Mini for you, and just basically to lay out all the options and to make it more clear. Because when you go through the when you pick these out on Apple's website, you have a few different options to start with, and there are a bunch of add-ons you can add on to that, and that might get a little bit confusing. And I just wanted to lay everything out in a nice, neat table to make things less confusing and make everything more clear. So I'm going to describe your options, how much they cost, stuff like that. I'm going to go over all of that stuff, and then after going over what the options are, I'm going to basically talk about some of the rationale behind why you might want to go with one choice versus another choice. I'm going to talk about which one I purchased myself. So right here, so basically, if you look at Apple's website, you have four options that you can start with. You have this first purple line here. This is a starting choice. And then this second purple line here, another M4 that you can start. This is another one you could start at this level, or you could start at this third one right here, or you could start at the fourth line right here. This starts you out with an M4 Pro. Now I'm going to talk about what each of the differences between each of these. Now this column here just lists the starting price for each one, and it lists the CPU that you get with each of these options that you start with. The first three of them, you just get the M4 processor. The fourth one, you get the M4 Pro. Now, for each of these, so the base that you start with for each of these starting models, you get that's this first line in purple here. It's mostly in light purple. Now, this stuff under here, this light orange and light yellow, this represents the add-ons that you might add on to each of these. And so like this right here, these are add-ons, and all add-ons right here. So I'm going to talk about those. So the base model right here it starts at $600 or $599, and you can get an education discount. I've heard that you don't even need to prove that you're a student or in education to get that. I think that gets you down to $500. I haven't done that myself. Also, you can get the base model for almost as cheap at Costco, so that's another option. Also, so these prices are based off of what, basically MSRP, what you're going to get from the Apple Store or Apple's website. So these four lines represent where you would start. These are the four starting points as represented on Apple's website. Now, starting with this base model, the absolute base model, the cheapest one you could get would be this line right here. Now, this is going to give you the M4 CPU. It's going to give you 10 CPU cores, 10 GPU cores, and 16 neural engine cores. All of them have 16 neural engine cores. That's the same across all of them, so that's something you don't have to worry about. And you're going to get the same CPU and GPU cores on all of the M4 models. So those are all going to be the same. Now, with the base model here, with this one, you are going to start with, you're going to start with 16 gigs of RAM, a 256 gig hard drive or SSD, and you're going to have 1 gigabit Ethernet, and you're going to get Thunderbolt version 4, so that's going to give you 40 gigabits per second. Memory bandwidth is going to be 120 gigabits per second, so that's going to give you 4 performance cores and 6 efficiency cores. Now, this Thunderbolt and memory bandwidth stuff, this is the same for all of the 3 M4 options. So if you're getting an M4 chip, you're getting Thunderbolt version 4 and this 120 gigabit per second memory bandwidth, and the same performance and efficiency cores. So with this absolute base model, a lot of people say this disk is a little bit too small. We'll talk about that in a little bit after we go through all these options, but this gives you a few options for upgrade. Now, you can upgrade your RAM. For $200, you can upgrade your RAM to 24 gigs. For $400, you can upgrade your RAM to 32 gigs. Now, for your disk, for $200, you're going to upgrade it to 512, which is it's an okay amount, but still kind of light. And we'll talk about what your options are there a little bit later after I go through all of these. But anyways, $400 for a terabyte disk and $800 for a 2 terabyte disk. So to upgrade from your 256 to 2 terabytes is $800 right there. Now, if you want to upgrade your Ethernet, You can upgrade from gigabit Ethernet to 10 gigabit Ethernet. Mostly unnecessary for most people. We'll talk about that in a bit, but that option is the same for all of these. They all start with gigabit Ethernet, and all give you the option to upgrade to 10 gig Ethernet for $100. So, in any case, you get these. The main thing with this base model is you have a couple optional RAM or memory upgrades, and you have three optional hard drive or SSD updates. So this is your storage space where you're going to keep all your files and stuff. It maxes out at 2 terabytes. Your internal storage is not going to go larger than 2 terabytes. That's the max you can pay for on the M4 drive. Now across, or rather on the M4 CPU. So so all three of these basically they max out at 2 terabytes. Now the prices are going to be a little bit different if you start with a different model. So basically the second option is basically just the same thing, but it's still starting you at 16 gigs, but it starts you with a 512 gig drive. It's basically the exact same thing as this, except they start you out with the 500. I don't know why they really, to make this more clear, they could have given you two starting options, M4 Pro and the M4, and just listed all of these as upgrades. Having these as starting options just doesn't make any sense at all. It's just extra stuff to make it more, it's more of a confusing way to get to the same thing. So anyways, with this second option here, the difference is it starts with at 512. That's the main difference, and it costs a couple $100 more. So that's the same price you would have paid for if you wanted to get this one right here and just upgrade it to 512. That's $200. If you want to jump to this one that starts with 512, it's $200 more expensive. So yeah, so that's basically what you're paying for right there. And then you have, you still have the exact same RAM or memory upgrades available, and your additional hard drive upgrades are $200. To go up to 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes. Each of these, instead of paying $400 for this, you're paying $200. Instead of paying $800 for this, you're paying $600 because you have a $200 higher starting price. So basically, both of these are $200 cheaper. It all works out to be the same in the end. So regardless of which of these you start with, if you pick the same options, you're going to get the same price, basically, which makes sense. It's just, I don't know why they give you two different starting points. Now, similar thing with this one, starts at $1,000. The main difference here, so they're still giving you 512 like you had on option number 2, but they're starting you out with 24 gigs. So it's $200 more expensive, and that's how much 24 gigs of RAM would have costed. So this is kind of like a middle of the line sort of option, and you could upgrade. So it's even cheaper to upgrade to the 32 model. But if you had gotten a cheaper, a cheaper starting point and then upgraded to 32, it would have been the equivalent of buying this. So in any case, this guy right here, so they still give you the option to upgrade to 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte at the exact, expected prices, $200 and $600, and same deal with 10 gig, the optional 10 gig Ethernet upgrade. So those are your options for the M4 processor. There's 3 different starting points. Basically, if you're going to go with the M4, these are the upgrade options you can choose. So just choose whichever ones are going to work for you. We'll talk about why you might choose those in a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about the M4 Pro. Now, the M4 Pro starts at $1,400, which $1,399 or $1,400, right? So M4 Pro starting price is that much. Now, this one, it starts you out with 12 CPU cores, so that's 2 extra cores compared to the M4, and it starts you out with a 16-core GPU instead of the 10-core, and same 16 neural cores. Starts you out with 24 gigs of RAM, so you're not going to go lower than that with this one, and you're not going to go lower than the 512 gigs of storage, but it starts with the same gigabit Ethernet. So starting out, it's already better than the M4, but because of more cores, more CPU and GPU cores, but that's not the only difference. It also gives you Thunderbolt version 5. So, when there are more accessories taking advantage of that speed, you'll be able to take advantage of that and get, more than double the transfer rates here. So you're going to be jumping up from 40 gigabits per second up to 120 gigabits per second. So big jump there. And same deal with memory bandwidth. Memory bandwidth is going to be more than doubled here. So instead of 120 gigabits per second, you're going to have 273 gigabits per second. So you're going to get a whole lot more gigabits per second if you go with if you go with this option. So yeah, it's more than just adding CPU and GPU cores. It's adding a newer version of Thunderbolt with a lot more speed and memory bandwidth. Now, if you look at the first upgrade with the M4 Pro, you actually have the option to get another version of the M4 Pro with even 2 more additional CPU cores and 4 more 4 more GPU cores for 14 core CPU and 20 core GPU. So that's $200. You get all those extra cores. To me, that made sense. It's probably going to give you faster render times and stuff. But in any case, it's nice to have, and it's not like a huge upgrade. It's not crazy like with the prices you see when you upgrade, when you max out your storage. So it seems a little bit more fair, but you're not getting the same advantage. This is less of a critical upgrade when compared to RAM or disk space. So same 16 cores. So this is one of the upgrades you might get with the M4 Pro. The other one, so it starts at 24 gigs of RAM, so you can pay $400 to go up to 48 gigs of RAM. Now, notice this skips the 32 gig option. So one of the other differences between the M4 and the M4 Pro is that it supports more memory. The M4 only supports up to 32 gigs. The M4 Pro supports up to 64 gigs. Now, the other thing, the M4 only supports up to 2 terabytes. So you're only going to get that much with that model. If you're getting the M4 Pro, you have the option to go up to 8 terabytes. So if you want that much storage, you got to go with the M4 Pro. You're not going to get that option. That option just won't be available with any, if you get just a regular M4, you just can't, that storage option is not available and the RAM is not available. So in any case, with the M4 Pro, the next jump after 24 gigs of RAM is 48. They just skip right past 32. Don't give you the option for that. You're going to get 48 gigs of RAM for $400. That's a $400 upgrade. And if you want to jump up to 64 gigs of RAM, that's a $600 upgrade. Now, you have to make these decisions at purchase time. You can't upgrade your RAM. It's built into the CPU. So the CPU and the RAM, it's all built as one unit. Now, technically, you can upgrade your SSD. It's a little bit of a complicated process. It involves either if you somehow have it's a non-standard drive that you can take apart your whole Mac Mini, which could be a bit of a pain, and then replace this drive. It's a non-standard drive, so you can't just buy a third-party drive, at least at this time, until they start making them. If you have one from another Mac, or if you have you happen to, or if once they start making them, then you can just swap the drive. But for now, the only thing you can really do is it's this complicated soldering option where you actually have to remove the chip off of the drive and solder a new one on there and then stick the chip back in. But technically they can be upgraded. So technically storage can be upgraded, but it's real tricky and probably not something the average person wants to do. Memory cannot be upgraded, so you're stuck with the memory you have. So that's one reason, while it is expensive, you can't upgrade it, so may as well get as much as you think you're going to need. You don't want to be stuck with something that's running out of memory while you're trying to edit videos. So figure out what you need. You probably don't need all of this for most use cases when you're editing videos. Any case, so you get these two options, the 48 gig and the 64 gig upgrade option. Now you also, so for storage, you're starting with 512 gigs. You have an option to upgrade for $200. You can upgrade to a terabyte. For $600, you can upgrade to 2 terabytes. Those are the same options that were available with the M4 processor. Now, if you want to, you can spend $1,200 to upgrade to 4 terabytes. And $2,400 to upgrade to 8 terabytes. And we'll talk more about why that might be a good or a bad idea in a little bit. But any case, yeah, so what else did I want to mention? Okay, so over here on this column, I mentioned 10 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. This is not for the base model here where you see 12 core CPU. This is for the upgraded model. So I probably should have put that one line down, or specified that on 2 separate lines. The rest of these, your performance and efficiency cores stay the same because you only have one option with the M4s. But with the M4 Pro, you have 2 CPU options. You have the 12 core CPU and 14 core. If you go with a 14 core CPU, that's 10 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. So you have as many performance cores as you did total cores on the previous M4. So all of these models come with an HDMI port and 2 USB-C ports on the front. So that's something to be aware of. So your Thunderbolt ports, you're going to get 3 of those on the back, which may or may not be enough depending on, depending on what. I personally think it would be nice to have more. But yeah, so 3 Thunderbolt in the back. They're going to be faster. So in the front, you have 2 just regular USB-C. They're not going to be as faster. So if you have a high-speed drive or an SSD that you want to plug into your Mac Mini, you probably want to plug it in the back. So you're going to get a faster one with the M4 Pro. And so 2 USB-C ports in the front. They're a little bit slower, but they're in the front, I guess, for convenience. And you're going to get a headphone jack in the front. So these two, two USB-C ports and headphone jack go in the front, a little different from previous generations of Mac Mini, HDMI port in the back, but these options come with all of the Mac Minis. And I believe I probably should have verified a source for this, but I think if you go with a 512 gig drive, regardless of the model, I think that's supposed to be faster than the 256 gig drive. Don't quote me on that. I don't have a source for that for this video, but in any case, that's something people are saying. You probably should get this anyways, even if you are going with external storage. So fully maxed, if you max out all of the storage and everything else, you max out the CPU, the RAM, the storage, everything, it is going to come out to about $4,699. Now, if you fully max everything out except for storage, that's still going to give you 500 gigs of storage because, you go with M4 Pro. By default, you start with 512 gigs. So basically, you're maxing everything out except not having any storage add-ons. That is going to come out to $2,299. This is the one I picked. I think this made sense for me. And I'll get into why I thought that was a good idea in a little bit. But that's why I chose that version. So that's why I thought that was a good idea. And I'll talk a little bit about why. I'll just jump right into why I purchased that one. Why I thought that was a good choice myself before I jump into some of the before I talk further about which options you should choose and why you might choose them. So. For me, I just wanted the most power and speed, the most RAM and everything that you could possibly get. With I got a maxed out version except for storage. I did not want to have to deal with running out of RAM, no matter what my workflow is. And in the future, I may be doing like multiple streams at 8K, 4K all at once, and I might be trying to render videos while playing a video game in the background and doing a bunch of other stuff. And I'm the type of person who will run a bunch of virtual machines while trying to edit and render videos and maybe having a video game running in the background. So I'm the kind of person who probably will push it to its max. So going with all the cores I can get and all the RAM I can get is probably a good idea. And so I maxed all of that out. And I also actually, not recommended for most people, I went with, instead of gigabit Ethernet, I got it added 10 gig Ethernet because I happen to have a NAS and I want to be able to transfer things back and forth between my NAS and my Mac Mini as fast as possible without slowing I just wanted maximum speed there for backups, for transferring videos over to my NAS, stuff like that. For me, it's worth it. For most people, it's not going to be worth it. So for most people, you're probably not going to want the 10 gig Ethernet. I went with that. So I maxed everything out, including getting 10 gig Ethernet. The one thing I did not max out was storage. So I stuck with 512 gigs of storage, skipped all of these upgrades. And the rationale behind that is basically for me, an external SSD is more than fast enough. It does not slow down my editing at all. And that's mostly what I'm going to be keeping on the external drive is just videos and stuff. And for all the regular day-to-day stuff, the normal built-in drive is more than enough. I know it can get used up pretty quickly, but mostly I'm not going to be storing stuff on this drive. So this is enough for this is more than enough for day-to-day use. It's still handy to have more if you have money to burn. Just for convenience, you don't have to clear it out too often, but generally I'm not storing stuff there, so it's not a huge concern. My main storage is going to be my NAS, so even if I maxed it out and got an 8 terabyte drive, or no matter what external drive I attach to, I'm going to run out of space eventually anyways, which is why I have a NAS and which is why I transfer all my stuff over to a NAS. That said, you do need workspace, and what I've found is that you can run out of space very quickly. You can run out of disk space really quickly with things you never even thought of, and it is really helpful to have some working space to work on and not just rely on keeping everything on your NAS. Technically, I can edit videos from my NAS. It's fast enough currently. But yeah, it's worth having onboard storage and external storage. I do have, a few terabytes external storage, which is worth having. Even if I am going to transfer things over to my NAS. So that was my use case. Maxed everything out except for the storage, and then I went with the 10 gig option, which is not a common option. This would not be the right choice for a lot of people, but for me it was. So those are my thoughts on that. So let's talk a little bit about what your rationale for buying different versions may or may not be. So the base model should be totally fine for most people, and based on what people are saying, it will generally stand up to almost anything you could throw at it. I personally went with I went with a maxed out M4 Pro system except for the storage. And the right choice for you may be either of these options. You might want to go with the base model. You might want to go with a fully maxed out model. You might want to go with the maxed out model without the storage. So or you might pick something somewhere in between depending on your budget and what your needs are. So let's just jump into some of the rationale behind that. So as I already mentioned, the 10 gig Ethernet upgrade, you probably don't need this unless you want the fastest possible way to access a NAS. And there might be a few other use cases that might saturate your network. Supposedly for, audio production and some other things. Sometimes you do things over the network. Some people may have their own use cases that may need 10 gigabit Ethernet, but most people don't need it. The one thing that comes to mind for me is access to a NAS, and even then, a gigabit Ethernet is usually more than fine. 10 gig can be nice and convenient if you're doing a lot of backups and transferring stuff. It's just going to be faster. Assuming you have a 10 gig switch, so getting the 10 gig Ethernet upgrade is only really going to give you an advantage if you have a 10 gig switch and if your other systems you're accessing also have a 10 gig card, right? So you have to keep that in mind. Don't just get it and assume your networking's magically going to be faster. So, before I forget, I forgot to mention this earlier. The Mac Mini does come obviously with Wi-Fi, so you don't have to rely on Ethernet. It does have Wi-Fi, and if you don't care about the speeds of Ethernet, you can just hook up to Wi-Fi and get your internet access that way. So, as for the CPU, the M4 Pro will give you more cores than the M4. This means more, as we discussed when we looked at this sheet. This means more than just being able to render things faster and do more things at the same time. It means that it can support up to 64 gigs of RAM instead of maxing out at 32. It also supports up to an 8 terabyte internal storage instead of just 2 terabytes. And getting the M4 Pro also means a newer, faster version of Thunderbolt and more memory bandwidth. So there's that. You might want to think about that, but this isn't a huge Yeah, so those are the real things you would want to think about. Really, it's more about, how much storage and RAM you want. Those are the real reasons you might pick the M4 over the or rather the M4 Pro over the M4. It's not just about cores, although cores are a good reason. I would say that's probably not even the main reason you might want to choose one over the other. So, so that those are my thoughts about, the Ethernet upgrade and the CPU version you might want to choose. Now, for storage, 256 is generally regarded as way too small. That's one of the things people comment on and criticize about the Mac Mini, is that the base model 256 is generally regarded as way too small. Now, even if you are just a regular user, like doing web browsing and checking email, that type of stuff, just spreadsheets and that kind of thing, the base model will probably be more than enough for most of your uses. The one gotcha with this might be storage. So starting with 256, you'll fill it up pretty quickly, even with things you didn't think of. Like I've had my the Photos app that shares photos between your iPhone, your iPad, and your Mac. A lot of times that can just a lot of those will get synced to your Mac, and a lot of times, depending on how much how many videos you record and how many pictures you take, that can eat a huge chunk. You can be eating a few hundred gigs of your storage space right there. And a lot of things you wouldn't expect, maybe your downloads folder and whatever else you have, your apps that you can install, all of this stuff adds up, and you can eat through 256 gigs really fast, and then you'll be regretting that. Of course, all you have to do, plug in an external SSD, and that problem is mostly solved. But just be aware that there are things, even if you don't think you have that many project files or things that would eat that much storage space, there's a ton of things you wouldn't have even thought of, like just installing regular applications and your Photos app, things like that will eat up a ton of that storage space. So even 512 will probably be eaten up pretty quickly, but I'd say that's probably a more reasonable amount for a starter Mac. So if you want to get the base model and maybe upgrade to 512 or get yourself an external drive, that's probably pretty reasonable for your average user. And that's probably going to work pretty well even for a power user doing a lot of video editing and stuff like that. But definitely for your average desktop user who's just, browsing the web, checking email, doing spreadsheets, right? So storage upgrades can be very expensive. You can attach an external SSD and it should work very well for most things, just not quite as fast as the internal drive. So the internal drive is almost always going to be much faster than an external SSD, but for most use cases, you're probably not going to notice that. If you want optimal speed, the internal drive is the way to go. And if you just have to have the absolute fastest response times and everything, paying for that extra storage for the internal drive may be worth it if you don't mind burning money. But yeah, for most cases, an external SSD is totally fine. Now, most SSDs are probably fine, but people have reported performance issues with some of them. So some of the less recommended drives may have performance issues. Make sure you're getting a fast drive. And one that's going to give you the performance you need to do what you're doing, whether it be, video editing. Make sure you get something that's highly rated and that's fast. Now, what people really recommend, rather than just buying, an external USB drive, you don't want to just buy anything that's USB-C external SSD, although a lot of times they may work. You get your latest SanDisk or Samsung drive. That's highly recommended on Amazon. They're probably going to work really great. But the most recommended external drive, the best option if you want to get the most performance from an external drive with your Mac Mini, is an NVMe drive in a Thunderbolt enclosure. So you're going to want to actually specifically get a Thunderbolt enclosure and specifically buy an NVMe drive or an NVMe drive in a Thunderbolt enclosure. That's going to give you the best speeds. Now I'm going to try to put a link to each of these options or to a few different options that you might want to check out in the description of this video. So check the links in the description of the video, and if you want to check out some of the options that are available for that. So on a laptop, it can be a pain attaching Mac Mini is a different situation than what you would be in if you had a laptop or a MacBook. But basically, on a laptop, it can be a pain attaching an external drive when you need to be able to move around with your laptop. So if you want to be mobile, you want to move from one place to another, you want to move from like your office to the couch, or maybe you're quickly pulling out your laptop to do something while you're waiting in the car to pick someone up or something, and then you want to quick stow your laptop away. That's a little bit of a pain if you have an external drive hanging off of your Mac. You either have to like unmount the drive and unplug it, closing all the applications that were using the drive, or you just have to leave the drive plugged in while you're storing away or transporting your laptop. That's a bit of a pain. So in the case of a laptop, if you have the money, I'd recommend maxing out your storage, if you have the budget for it. But in the case of a Mac Mini, most of the time you're not moving it around. It just sits there on your desk. You're not doing anything with the Mac Mini. It just sits there, so it's really not a big deal to plug an external drive into it. So I would recommend an external drive more with a Mac Mini than with a laptop. So for a laptop, if it were a laptop, I would say go with 1 terabyte at least, and max it out if you have the budget. With a Mac Mini, you don't have to worry about that much. So if you're not concerned about the budget though, go right ahead and max out your internal storage. Now, also a side note, something important to mention when it comes to external drives, with your external SSD, you're going to want to format it with APFS and not exFAT or EXFAT. So important to understand so APFS will give you the best performance and reliability on Mac OS, and this is especially recommended if you're putting Final Cut Pro libraries on the disk. Now, exFAT is interoperable with other OSs, and it's generally just used if you need to share the disk with a PC. So if you're sharing it with a system that's running either Windows or Linux, you're going to want to be using exFAT. It's not optimal for Mac storage, but it's good for sharing things. So if you have a drive you're going to be transferring back and forth a lot, you're going to want to put exFAT on that. And if it's going to be just plugged into your Mac all the time, APFS. Using exFAT as your storage, even if you are sharing it, exFAT's going to not be optimal. You might, exFAT won't give you the optimal performance or reliability. Things could get messed up on it. It just doesn't have the redundancy and, error checking and stuff like that you're going to get with APFS. So using APFS is strongly recommended. And if you do need to share with another system, ideally, you might get 2 external drives, one for exFAT, one for APFS. Again, depending on your budget and everything and your needs. So let's talk about RAM. So the M4 Mac Minis start out at 16 gigs of RAM for the base model. This is probably totally fine, but I would recommend more if you're using it for real work like video editing and not just browsing the web. So it's probably going to be fine with 16 gigs of RAM, but you probably want to go with more if you can. If you're really budget limited, you're probably going to be totally fine with 16 gigs of RAM though. So any case, I've watched my RAM usage on my Mac Mini go up over around 24 to 26 gigs while rendering videos with Final Cut Pro. And I actually like to have even more RAM available to do other things. Like I may be playing a video game or something while my videos render, so my Final Cut Pro videos may be rendering. While I'm waiting for them, I might go play a video game, browse the web, might have a ton of Chrome tabs open, so a bunch of other stuff that just eat up RAM. And sometimes I just continue editing videos while I have one batch of videos rendering. So there's more stuff that can eat up RAM. So even more is better, but just to render some videos, depending on the codec and stuff, the RAM usage may be higher or lower. But I've seen, around 24 to 26 gigs being used while rendering videos. The OS itself uses some RAM, and anything running in the background like a browser or stuff is going to eat up some RAM. Now, even if you have a lower amount like 16 gigs, I'm not sure if this would have caused swapping or just would have chosen not to use that much RAM. I'm not sure what would have been the case if if I tried to export those same videos with only 16 gigs of RAM. I know you generally want to avoid swapping. Swapping is where when you run out of RAM, it's going to use some of your SSD as RAM. It's basically like a virtual drive. It's using swap space. And that's a whole lot slower than your actual RAM, and it's actually bad for your drive, and it's going to wear out your drive. So it's going to cause your drive to be worn out sooner, and it's going to cause your system to start lagging and running a lot slower than it should be. So when you're using your SSD as RAM, like when you're using swap space, which is what happens when you max out your RAM, when you run out of RAM, it's going to slow your system down a lot more, and it's just really not, it's not what you want to go for. So, I've seen Final Cut Pro eating up 24 to 26 gigs while rendering, some 4K video with specific codecs. So, that said, ideally you probably want to go above that. So, yeah, like if you're going with an M4, might want to at least get 32 gigs. Just my thoughts on that. You're probably okay with the 16, but going with more is recommended. I would recommend more. So, any case, you might want to think, about 32 gigs for the M4 and 48 gigs for the M4 Pro. So the M4 maxes out at 32. I think 48 will put you at the point where you have nothing to worry about at all with RAM. You can pretty much do whatever you want, and it's going to be a non-issue. So if you did go with the M4 Pro, I think 48 is really the sweet spot. I don't think, for most people, I don't think there's, whatever your workflow is, whatever your professional or artistic workflow is, whatever type of work you're doing, you're probably not going to need anywhere near more than 48. 48 is probably overkill for almost everything. But I think that's the sweet spot. You wouldn't want to go as high as 64 for most people. Some people it's worth going up to 64, but you really almost always don't need to do that unless you're doing something really extreme. I went with 64 gigs just to be absolutely sure, and just because I just want it. I personally am likely to run into some of these extreme use cases, so going with 64 gigs is not a bad idea for me, and I just wanted to make sure I went with the absolute highest amount of RAM I could get, because I don't want to ever have to deal with running out of RAM again. I want to make sure I never run out of RAM until the point where I replace this system, which could be, quite a few years down the line. So, some people recommend, rather than maxing out a system for longevity, saying, hey, I want to buy the system for life. Why do that when you could just buy the base model today, and a few years down the road, when it's too old and slow, you can just buy the next base model. So buying two base models in a row is cheaper than buying one maxed out model. So that might make more sense. To some people, that makes more sense. Any case, so a little bit more about memory. Apple Silicon memory is supposedly equivalent to double that amount of non-Apple RAM. So I know people will tell you RAM is RAM, but So for example, 8 gigs of Apple Silicon RAM is the equivalent to 16 gigs of RAM on an Intel-based system. Now, while sure the RAM is still RAM, and the chips are probably the RAM is still RAM, but the reason they say this is what Apple is claiming, and the reason that Apple claims that an 8 gigs of Apple Silicon RAM is the equivalent to 16 in an Intel-based system, they say this is due to memory being used more efficiently. So Apple Silicon makes more efficient use of RAM, and they also have memory compression, which I guess makes a big difference, and they have their unified memory architecture. So the memory is built right into all together with the CPU. So you don't have the same latency with separate chips and a separate bus. So the CPU doesn't need to use this whole separate bus to access memory like it would on an Intel-based system. It's all connected directly together. So access to memory is a whole lot faster and a whole lot more efficient on Apple Silicon. So you don't have the same issues. So they legitimately can make better use of RAM than you could on an Intel-based system. Now, whether that makes it double the value or not, I'm a little bit skeptical. Considering all of this stuff, it makes me feel better about a lower RAM system than I would have, considering the efficiency of RAM on Apple Silicon. But I'm still not 100% sold on this, and I still just prefer to get more RAM. Even though they're telling me, hey, it's worth double the amount, I still prefer to just get more. I don't fully trust that, and I don't know that would always be the case in all use cases, even if that is trustable, what they say. That's probably only for some use cases. I'm sure there are use cases where that's just not the issue, and it may be an exaggeration. So I don't fully trust it. I would say just get more RAM. Now, my personal experience, so my Mac Mini is upgrading from a MacBook Pro. So I had an Intel-based MacBook Pro from 2019. I purchased it early 2020. It's the 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro, and I went with a relatively low-spec MacBook Pro. So I had an i7 with 16 gigs of RAM, and so that was one of the lower models that you could possibly have, and it was still pretty great. It has served me well. I've been able to do everything I needed to pretty well at the beginning. So it even today, it still works pretty well editing most videos at 4K 60 frames per second. Like videos that I pull off of my HEVC videos, 4K 60 frames per second, I pull off of my GoPro. I can slice that video up and put together videos pretty quickly without any performance issues. But it would slow down to unbearable speeds when editing videos with certain encodings. So and I really have to look into exactly which ones cause issues and which ones don't. But some videos work completely fine, and some videos, depending on the encoding and maybe even the bit rate, will slow down when I try to like brush through the timeline, or when I actually play through a video just to watch a section of it, to preview a section of a video I've been editing. I've noticed when I just let Final Cut Pro just start playing through a video, it starts eating up all my memory. Once my memory gets eaten up and it starts swapping, everything starts slowing down and lagging like to a ridiculous degree, and it just becomes kind of unbearable. So running into some issues with some encodings, and some it still works pretty well. Although, sometimes just running too many things would slow it down and eat up all the RAM. This could be some combination of running Xcode, Chrome, the Godot game engine, or Final Cut Pro. Just having too many things running would eat up all my RAM. So I've noticed over the years, so this is in 2024, and by 2024, just Mac OS and the base system seems to, I haven't, recorded the exact values before and after, but between 2020 and 2024, just Mac OS itself and the base system and all the stuff it's running eats up more RAM by default than it used to, and things are slower than it used to be. So there's that, combined with running a few things at once. My RAM gets eaten up pretty quickly. It doesn't take a whole lot. I don't have to be editing 4K videos or doing anything too extreme for it to eat up all my RAM. And, if I had just doubled the RAM back in, 2020, I probably wouldn't even be running into any performance issues with my old Intel-based Mac. So that said, this was a bit of an issue. This frustrated me a lot, and this is kind of what made me decide that I just wanted to max out the RAM, even if it's overkill and I don't need it. I just wanted to max it all out, so this is what I did. And I just don't want to deal with that, and I think I want to push it further than I ever did with my MacBook Pro. So I am probably going to do more elaborate things and edit. I'm probably going to eventually go to 8K video and do a lot more other stuff that's going to require a whole lot more power. So I think by 2024, macOS just eats more RAM, and that's basically it. That was my experience with the MacBook Pro 2019. I still use it for a lot of stuff when I need to be mobile, and it still works great for a lot of things like editing code and stuff like that. And I can still use it to edit videos on the go. It's just not as optimal and nowhere near as fast as the Mac Mini M4 Pro, which is really zippy, really fast, and I'm really enjoying working with it. So all that stuff considered, those are the reasons you might want to pick more RAM or less RAM. So depending on what you're going to be doing, you probably don't need to max it out. Sweet spot's probably 48 gigs. And 32 gigs is probably more than enough for any video editing you're going to do, unless you're doing ridiculous multiple streams simultaneously of like 8K video or something like that. So even the 16 gigs of RAM, you'll probably be okay and be able to even edit things and do, power user stuff, video editing, stuff like that without any issues. People started with the base model, 16 gigs of RAM, and they've been able to do all their video editing and do a bunch of things all at once without it even slowing down a little bit. So 16 gigs of RAM on your M4 is going to be different from 16 gigs of RAM on your old, on an old Intel based Mac. So all that considered, yeah, hopefully this helps you decide which one to buy better. Hopefully I didn't leave out any huge key points. If this video was useful or interesting, you might want to give me a thumbs up. If you have your own experience or your own thoughts, or maybe if I was wrong about something, leave your own experience down in the comments. If I was wrong about anything or you want to correct me on anything, also leave a comment down below letting me know, if you disagree with anything I said. You might want to hit that subscribe button. We do a lot of other great tech content. We're covering a lot of Apple stuff, but not just Apple stuff. We do PC stuff too. Doing a lot of hardware, software. We cover, PC stuff. We cover, Linux, Windows, hardware. We do electronics, Raspberry Pis, robots, networking, coding, automation, all sorts of text, everything tech related you could think of, up to and including 3D printing. We do robot building, all sorts of great stuff, lots of interesting tech stuff you're not going to miss out on, and still lots of Apple stuff. So you don't want to miss out on all of that. Make sure if you want that all in your YouTube feed, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And also check the links in the description. I'm going to try to put links to relevant things. Like I'm going to try to link to the Mac Mini, even though that's not hard to find. And I'm going to try to link to some recommended SSDs that you might want to get with your Mac Mini. So check that out in the description of this video. And that is about all I have for today. So thanks for watching, and we will see you guys on that next video.